First, I'd just like to acknowledge the member for Bass and the rest of the committee for the great work they've done. I was not a part of it, but it's a topic that's very close to my heart. It's also close to the heart of a lot of people in my electorate. Cook and much of Australia's way of life is built around the water. 87% of Australians live around the water. Cook has the Pacific Ocean to the east, the Georges River to the north, and the Hacking River to the south. And many in my electorate and many in our country enjoy these waterways. And our country as well, surrounded by the Pacific, the Southern and the Indian Oceans. It's really a huge part of our identity as Australians, but also for people who live in my electorate enjoying these waterways. And plastic pollution is threatening that enjoyment of Australians, that enjoyment of people in my electorate. It's also threatening biodiversity, and it's also threatening human health. It's a significantly growing issue. There's currently 150 million metric tonnes of pollution in the ocean. And according to Australian Marine Conservation Society, on current trends, there will be more plastic than fish in our ocean by 2050. 3/4 of the pollution on Australia's coastline is made up by plastic, and plastics account for about 80% of all marine debris. It's a huge threat to biodiversity. Entanglement in abandoned and lost discarding fishing gear known as ghost nets, plastic bags, ropes, clothing, six-pack rings, some of the most common items to injure sea turtles, marine mammals, seabirds, whales, sea lions and others. And when this marine life ingests plastics, it can block their digestive system, causing a long and slow death from starvation. Chemical additives leach into the air, the water, the soil, and much of this is toxic to animals and, yes, can be toxic to humans as well. These toxic additives that are absorbed can accumulate in the food chain and actually pass from fish to humans. A particularly intractable problem in plastics are things such as BPAs, flame retardants and heavy metals. The presence of these materials in recycled plastics limits its use in consumer products with high potential for human exposure, such as food packaging. Higher up in the food chain, when ingested by humans, microplastics can damage cells in the human body, leading to serious health impacts, and there has been linkages in academic studies to cancers, lung diseases and birth defects. During use and also disposal, plastics release microplastic and nanoplastic fragments, along with thousands of toxic chemicals, including additives, residual monomers, into the environment and into people. Plastic additive chemicals can disrupt endocrine functions, and there has been studies linking it to risks for premature births, neurodevelopment disorders, male reproductive birth defects, infertility, obesity, cardiovascular disease, renal disease and even cancers. Now, these need to be investigated more, but there is increasingly mounting evidence. And it's particularly hazardous for children. Exposures have been linked with pregnant mothers as well, with a lot of other different things, and cancers. Early life exposure to plastics is actually being linked to increased risk of non-communicable diseases such as heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and obesity in children across the human lifespan. Now look, we have a big problem. That's what that tells us. There is a big emerging problem, and the trends in actually the disposal and recyclable in plastic, well look, we need to reduce, reuse and recycle. They're the three traditional levers you have in plastic management. Now, these strategies have proven highly effective for paper, cardboard, glass and aluminium, but have largely failed when it comes to plastic. Plastic recovery and recycling rates are below 10% globally. 90% of plastics are not reduced, reused or recycled. They're actually disposed of into our ecosystem. Australia ranks 15th in the world for generation of single-use plastics. That's absolutely terrible for a country of our standing and for a country where we have the care about the environment in our population. We have released in 2018 national plastic targets that for 2025, the idea that would be 100% of packaging would be reusable or recyclable or compostable, 70% of plastic would be recycled or composted, 50% would be the average recycled plastic, including in packaging, and we'd be phasing out single-use plastic. I think it's safe to say we are going to fail abysmally to achieving those 2025 targets. The proportion of recyclable packaging has decreased from 86 to 84%, though there was a change to the score, so maybe it's a bit muddy there, but it's not going up. The plastic recycling rate increased from 18 to 20%, way off the 70% target. The average recycled content of packaging has increased by a mere 1 percentage point from 39 to 40, and problematic and unnecessary single-use plastic has been reduced from 33% from the 27 to 2018 baseline. So, look, I do think if industry cannot get their act together, it makes the case for government intervention and regulation. I think when plastic in our external environment is an externality, and it's an unpriced externality. I think that my opening monologue, you could hear the damage it is doing to the environment, to biodiversity, and potentially to human health. And I think if industry is not acting to do that, we need to start pricing that externality. And I think the warning to industry is if they don't get their act together soon, that will be priced. And I think the opportunity for Australian industry here is, to borrow an ice hockey term, maybe it's out of place in Australia here, but from my time in the US, the puck is moving in that direction. So if Australian industry, and we have a very successful and proud and successful packaging industry in Australia, be it Amcor or Pratt Manufacturing, but if Australian innovators can get their act together and see the puck is moving in this direction, there is going to be a huge economic opportunity globally to get either recycled or substitute manufacturing, packaging manufacturing economic opportunities for this country. There'll be jobs. It'll become a huge export industry. And domestically, we also need to look at recycling programs. Sorting is a huge problem, and even the technology involved in sorting, when we're only getting 10% of plastic being recycled, that's largely a sorting problem. And it's not a uniquely Australian problem. This is a global problem, and more dollars will be going here. We need a sustainable market for recycled plastics, and again, that may at some stage look at a tax or a levy or some sort of pricing mechanism for that. Reducing consumption. State governments and federal governments need to work together here to work out how we reduce consumption of that. And regulation. There is a need for regulation here, and look, I would prefer that be a market mechanism, but we have an externality, and that externality is not being dealt with, and it's not being dealt with effectively. And I think over time, look, let me be also direct, the reason people are using plastic is it's got a lot of great properties. It's cheap, it's flexible, it's good to produce. So it's quick to produce and easy to produce. So there is a market product there, but we now have evidence of the damage it is doing. And with the damage it's doing to enjoyment of human waterways, marine biodiversity, and human health, we do need to start acting. There is innovation and dollars going towards it, but I do think it is similar to energy policy with net zero, where there is a case for regulation of government and potentially pricing this. So I think if I was an Australian manufacturer out there in this industry, I think there's a huge opportunity to actually start moving towards this, a huge economic opportunity, not just domestically, but an export opportunity. And I would love to see Australian companies taking the lead in that, capturing a global market and doing great stuff. Look, a couple of things. I'd like to make a couple of shout-outs to businesses I have seen doing that. Cyclus in Indonesia is making products as much as 40% cheaper while providing a refill cart for food and cleaning items such as soap to reduce single plastic waste use. And I'd just like to call out one person in my electorate, Cal Glanzig, a local resident who's produced a film, Rising Up. Rising Up is an epic film that discusses the problem of plastics and then talks about the many innovators in the private sector who are starting to solve this problem. So I am filled with hope. I do think this is a solvable problem, and there are technologies out there that begin to solve it today.